So I've been talking a long time about Transport Fever, so here it is. And I just did a playthrough of Train Fever, which Transport Fever, of course, is built off of using the same game engine. And it has a lot of the same features, as you can see here. There are more choices because you can do campaigns and tutorials, and the free game is actually just a basic new game with no special stuff about it at all, though you can customize. And then you have the load game for saved games, and I have a whole bunch of them at this point because I've played far more Transport Fever than Train Fever. So we have, for example, my 5th game that I ever did. This was all a little bit experimental, so I'm still saying, first game, second game, third game, fourth game, 5th game. And the 5th game went so well that I also used it to experiment with the aircraft in the game, as you can see there. And then the game dates, of course, the game dates are different from the dates I actually played the game. So you can see down under the date, the official date there is not the same thing as the creation date of the files. And it gives you the balance of your account and all that stuff as well in the information. Now I'm going to try the 5th game, which is the most recent one, which only is in game year 1960. But as you'll see, there are a whole bunch of anachronistic things about the game in terms of how they portray the different eras. The vehicles are roughly accurate for each era, but things like the buildings and the cars on the street and the fashions that people wear are not necessarily accurate. So for example, in the 70s you still see cars with separate fenders, and you can see streamlined cars in the early 1900s, so it's not completely accurate. Of course, when I say vehicles and cars, I'm making a distinction between private cars and your vehicles. And the fashions, they only really have 2 eras of fashion, like this sort of, I don't know what you would call it, sort of pseudo-Victorian look, which really looks more like goths in the 90s. And then you have modern fashions, which are probably more accurate for today than in Transport Fever 2. You can see the Victorian fashions here mixed in with some of the newer ones, because probably this screenshot was taken in one of the intermediate years. But the modern fashions are, I know nothing about fashion at all, but my sense is it's more accurate than Transport Fever 2. But the problem is there's no transition. There's this jump from, 19th century clothing to sweatsuits around like 1950 or what have you. And it just looks kind of strange. So we go into 1960 here, game year 1960. And I'm going to do some street views here and give you an idea of this mature game. You might think, well, you're not doing a new game like you usually do, and that's true because I want to show how the game can develop, what it can look like in the later stages. So we're starting in game year 1960 with steam locomotives still running, because I saved the game in 1960 because I planned on dieselizing right at that point, because I'm using the USA DLC in this. And as you'll see, the USA DLC has a lot of problems too, and I've mentioned this before, that the Train Fever and Transport Fever USA DLC is mostly related to the trains and the buses and so on. So the buildings you can see are still European, more or less, and there's almost nothing to indicate this is the US DLC other than the desert landscape, sort of desert landscape, and the American vehicles. And the street vehicles are still European. There's even one scene in this video where you'll see Trabis, I'm sure. And of course, Trabants were never sold in the US, and were never seen on American streets until after the Cold War. And even now, a lot of state governments don't want you having them, even though they'll allow you to have a lot of other vintage vehicles. Anyway, so this looks like Europe because they didn't really do the USA DLC properly in my view. But it's interesting anyway. It's a little bit surrealistic, you could say. American vehicles in a European landscape. Or maybe in a European cityscape in an American landscape. Oh, I'm going to ride along with one of the trams here, which is a PCC, if I'm not mistaken. They have a few PCC lookalikes, actually, in the tram selection. I believe are PCCs. And we're riding along, and you can see it basically looks like Switzerland. It doesn't look like the USA. The street markings are wrong, the buildings are wrong, everything's wrong. But the people behave somewhat realistically, especially when they're walking. They're less realistic when they're stationary because they tend to look a little bit like zombies. And you saw a Ford Model A zoom by there, which is not accurate necessarily for 1960. There were probably a few Model A's still around. So here the tram is pulling into a tram station. And you can see people are mostly wearing modern clothes in this, even though this is supposed to be 1960. But that's because there are no 1960s era people models for the original Transport Fever. I still think it looks really cool, and most of this lag you're seeing in the frame rate is not the game. This is mostly Open Broadcaster, because I had to run both of them at once, of course, and Transport Fever is almost at the limit of what my computer can do, actually. So it's surprising I was able to do this video at all, really. Now we'll look at one of the trains, the Hiawatha. Hiawatha locomotive, really. The passenger coaches are not authentic. So this gives you a view of the cab view, which was not in Train Fever, but which is in Transport Fever and Transport Fever 2. Transport Fever 2 offers you the ability to change views, whereas Transport Fever, the original, only gives you this one. And you notice the speedometer down in the lower right, because I'm running the US DLC with US settings. I have a miles per hour speedometer. The Hiawathas and the trains generally in Transport Fever accelerate very realistically, I think, but their braking is very, very fast. Much too fast to be accurate. And as you'll see, this Hiawatha is just going to slam on the brakes and stop on a dime here, pretty much. Real Hiawathas and real American trains and real trains generally can't generally stop that fast. So we're waiting to load the passengers here. In any minute we'll flip around, Railroad Tycoon 2 style, and be on our way back to the other city, or Las Vegas from Erie, a route that never existed in real life America, but these town names are randomized. It has nothing to do with real US geography. As I've said before, Transport Fever, Train Fever, and all the rest generally generate terrain based on a seed. So they're a little bit Minecraft, a little bit Civilization, but certainly not realistic in the sense of how they generate the terrain. The terrain is completely fictional. So here the Hiawatha is slowly accelerating out of town. And I think this acceleration rate is reasonably accurate when you consider that it's a very, very powerful locomotive with a relatively short train. These trains are basically duplicates of each other, so you see the other one only has 4 coaches on. This one I believe is 4 also. But basically much shorter than a real American train, so you put a high-powered locomotive on, you're going to get acceleration like this. This is actually pretty accurate. So, Hiawathas in real life, of course, ran at 100 miles an hour. The maps in Transport Fever are so small, though, that it's difficult getting any of the trains to run their prototypical speeds unless they're relatively slow. Because as soon as you're done accelerating, you have to brake, basically. The signaling is European. I'm presuming that's all Swiss. The crossing signals are also European. The cross bucks are European. Everything's European except for the trains, and that's an accuracy problem, obviously. Doesn't stop it from being a cool game, but in terms of prototypical accuracy. It's lacking in some ways. Very pretty, but not accurate, basically. So we got this choppy frame rate here. As the train passes 75 miles an hour, or 120 kilometers per hour. We're on the concrete ties here, so in the Transport Fever universe, that means we can basically go as fast as we want, as long as the curves allow it. So 83, 84, and the Hiawatha just keeps right on going, because it is a Hiawatha. These signals are much closer together than they would be in real life, too. Again, I'm adjusting for the realities of the Transport Fever universe. Now we're hitting 98 miles an hour, 99 miles an hour, and we have to brake for Las Vegas. And as you can see, Las Vegas looks nothing like the real life Las Vegas. So the train gradually decelerates, although much faster than it would in reality. Maybe if it has the emergency application on, but not for regular service. On a vintage train without electro-pneumatic brakes, mind you. So, even accelerates a little bit to get into the platforms, and it hits the platforms at almost 40. Now it's over 40, and it's headed for the buffers, and suddenly, brakes come on, and it stops on a dime again. So again, not really accurate. You see the people standing there like zombies? They fixed that in Transport Fever 2. People stand much more accurately in Transport Fever 2. And we're waiting to fill up the train again. And you can see the Trobby on the street there just past, a little white Trobby. So, Trobbies everywhere, even though we're supposed to be... There goes a Citroen. Another car you'd never see in America. The Model A at the gate there, that's realistic, but I don't know if it's realistic for the 60s. And I take the external view. Unfortunately, the external view won't pace the train. You have to do that manually. So I'm going to attempt to do that now. It is tricky. Generally, these view controls are a little bit choppy, especially if you're having to run Open Broadcaster on top. So I'm going to now show you a variant of this track that I did, this map rather. I took this saved game and I added airports because I wanted to experiment with the airplanes because I hadn't tried the airplanes yet in Transport Fever. It's something that you don't have in Train Fever. And I found that they're not particularly useful because the maps are too small. There's a lot of sacrifices. There are a lot of sacrifices to realism in portraying the airlines in this. It looks kind of cool, but it's really not accurate. But you'll see how it works in a minute. You have to load up the map here. Generally, once you load one map in Transport Fever, the second one is much faster. It's the argument against reloading the whole app if you're going to change games. There you have a red arrow, EMU from Switzerland, and the splash screen. What looks like a Swiss landscape. And we're waiting and waiting. When I did the previous game, I skipped over the loading. That's why it was faster than this. Because in reality, this was faster than the first game. To reiterate, this is actually the same saved game, but basically with airports added as an experiment. So we get to see how the airplanes work. I only actually set up 2 flights, and the one we're going to fly on is Erie to San Francisco. Again, not a flight that exists in real life. And it will be on a de Havilland Comet 4, which is an aircraft not generally used in the US. It was a British aircraft and based on the original de Havilland Comet that tended to blow up in midair, so I'm not sure why they chose it for this instead of the Boeing 707, although it might have something to do with licensing. I guess the issue there is they do have the Boeing 737 and a number of other Boeings in the game, so probably isn't licensing. It's probably some other decision on the part of the developers to give you a shot at using vintage stuff. Now here you can see a lot of my oil shipments are behind here. I need to refine my refineries in terms of their transport links, it looks like. But I'm not going to deal with that right now. I'm just going to ride along with the flights. You can see you can call up the airport tool there to build airports. But if you go over here, you can look at all your vehicles, any transport mode, information, and then little pictures of the trains and buses. And there I have aircraft number 1 and aircraft number 2. And I haven't bothered to name the lines flights. I couldn't be bothered. So here we are on line 37. I guess it would be flight 37 from Erie to San Jose. Actually, no, excuse me. To Erie San Jose Airport, because Erie on this map is very close to San Jose, which has nothing to do with real-life American geography. But they are close to each other, and one thing that is true about America is sometimes an airport will be placed between 2 cities, as in the case of Dallas and Fort Worth, for example. So that was my reason. I felt that because the airport couldn't be right in the center of town, it just made sense to use one airport for both cities, especially because I didn't expect to get a lot of business, and I was right. What is accurate about this is that almost nobody wants to fly a distance this short, so it's very hard getting this airplane to fill. As you'll see, we'll only have a very small number of passengers, in spite of the fact that the plane only carries 21 people, which is far less than a real de Havilland Comet would be able to carry. They've lowered all the passenger numbers on all the vehicles because they want to simplify modeling the individual citizens whose business you're trying to get. So all the scaling of people is off in the Transport Fever games. I don't mind that so much, even though some people do. I just think that the fact that they bother to model individual people at all makes it much more interesting. Doesn't really bother me at all that the numbers are so small. In fact, if anything, it makes it a little bit easier to keep track of everything that you want to keep track of. So there we have a DC-4 going to the gate. It's the one other flight I'm running, and our de Havilland Comet is touching down in Erie, San Jose, and will taxi to the gate. They don't do the air traffic control chatter, but on the other hand, they don't do the chatter on the radio for the railroads or the buses either. So that's not necessarily too much of a loss. It would only be really for atmosphere anyway. You can notice a bunch of steam trains running at the same time as jet airplanes, which is not as inaccurate historically as you think. Although that train we just saw is a very dirty 1930s diesel. Not a steam train, actually. It's a Pioneer Zephyr. One of the earliest diesel passenger trains. And looks like the train stopped at a signal, actually. Meanwhile, our Comet is choppily making its way to the gate. Again, we're talking about my open broadcaster struggling with this. And as you can see, I just checked the finances of the de Havilland Comet, and we're in the red. As I expected. The DC-4 is taking off. And we're going to this gate. And you notice the passengers will all just disappear. They wouldn't actually walk. There we go. The door shuts, and the de Havilland Comet is off. So it will taxi back to the runway. The terminal time of the airports is lightning quick in Transport Fever. Not accurate at all, even for the vintage era, when you didn't spend an hour or two in security. The climb out is very realistic, I think, although your rotation speed is very low for the de Havilland Comet in Transport Fever. I don't think it's actually accurate. So it stops there very realistically and then throttles up and rotates at around really 90 miles an hour, which is still slower than a real de Havilland Comet would rotate at. And it does the climb out very realistically, although what you'll notice is it lowers out at a very low altitude. I don't actually know what altitude this is because there's no altimeter, but it appears to be like in the ballpark of 3,000 or 4,000 feet, if that. Might be less actually. So much lower than a real de Havilland Comet or most jets would cruise at. But as you'll see, it almost doesn't matter. The only unrealistic thing about this is that the speed you run at, you see the speedometer is shooting up there. The speed is much too high for this altitude, actually. Only military jets go this fast at this low altitude, but the fact of the matter is that almost as soon as we're up to cruising speed, just like with the Hiawatha, we have to land. So the low altitude in that sense makes sense. You don't climb at to a ridiculous altitude if you're only just doing a short hop, of course. So there's the airport. You can only just barely see it there. I have the pointer almost at it. It's above the pointer, actually. There it is. So we will do our approach here. Completely skipping the pattern, we'll just go straight in. Although we have to get lined up with the runway here. So we turn final here. The distance from the runway isn't necessarily inaccurate. The approach speed is very low. I'm pretty sure a real de Havilland Comet wouldn't be able to manage this approach speed. This would be more accurate for a propeller plane. But it looks pretty realistic, if you can give them credit. So, now that we're touched down, we'll taxi to the gate again. Now, all of these airports, somewhat realistically, have to be fed with transit. I haven't found that even people with cars, and that is a distinction in Transport Fever in that some people have cars and some people don't. Even people with cars won't generally drive out to the airport. You usually need to provide some sort of transit. And at first I had a little bit of difficulty implementing this because I didn't realize you have to wait a little bit for the transport link to become popular before it will actually start feeding the airport. I originally thought it didn't work, because in Transport Tycoon it in fact does not work. It doesn't even work in locomotion, but it does work in Transport Fever if you give it the chance. You put up a bus stop or a tram stop, something like that, to feed the airport, and people will take the transit to the airport. And this airport has been set up more or less correctly in this way, even if the ridership for the moment is very low. Although one of the things I'm noticing is the ridership is increasing gradually as I play the game further, which isn't something I noticed when I tested this originally. So there are the passengers again. They're going to get on the plane. And the plane shuts its doors and departs. And it's almost in profit, notice. Almost. Which surprises me. I guess maybe I could go back to this game and see if I can actually make some profit off these flights. It does seem like a little bit of a struggle. Now we're already in the 1970s, notice, because that's how fast time flies in Transport Fever. But anyway, let's look for the bus. Let's see if we can find the bus that is serving this airport. There's the selection of airplanes that you can build in the hangar, because the hangar serves like a transport depot in Transport Fever. You don't actually get an aircraft factory. If you want to build airplanes, you build it in a hangar. There's a Boeing 737. As I said, Boeings are in the game. They don't include the 707 for some reason. In Transport Fever 2, they give you the 737 a few years early in the cargo variant. I don't know why. Early 60s, long before it existed. And then the passenger variant comes along at a more accurate time. Now, for some reason, the hangar is called San Francisco South. I don't want it called that. San Francisco Hangar, maybe we can call it? Let's see. I'll fix that now. San Francisco Hangar. Now, getting back to what I was saying, let's take a look at the bus, see if we can find the bus. Now, you see the bus icon going there. I want to zoom in close enough to actually click on it. That's the bus stop, indicating the line. There's only one bus serving it right now. So let's go down the road and find that bus we just spotted. There it is. I believe that's a General Motors fishbowl. It's a cool old bus. I remember when these were very common in the US, although they usually weren't used for any kind of distances. They were almost always city buses. But they're a very classic American bus design. Oh, we missed it. Again, you can't really paste them in Transport Fever. I wish you could. Only that little window there will let you do it. So we'll jump on the bus again. We'll ride the fishbowl out to the airport. And it's fighting me again. I guess we're going to have to just follow it with the view tool here. I remember these buses. I'm old enough to remember when these were in service. And they were basically, like I said, city buses, not intercity buses on any level. One of them makes an appearance in Joker, actually the new Batman film. This is a scene where he's on one of the old fishbowls. If memory serves. I might be misremembering that because I haven't seen the film, but I've seen a clip in it which appears to be on an old General Motors fishbowl. Because the film Joker is supposed to be set in 1981, which is prototypical for these buses. Alright, so the people get on the bus, and there's a guy getting off the bus, and we're going to click on him. His name is Kyle Scott, and we're just going to walk along with him. Because you can. And I haven't shown this feature yet. A couple of Model A's passing by there. A Beetle and a Citroen. Not generally typical US traffic, but you see, you can walk along with the citizens who you're trying to market to. You could even, his walk speed is very fast there. He's able to walk at 4 miles an hour. But he's trying to get to his flight, so maybe that's why he's walking at 4 miles an hour. And you can see all these personal details there, whether he owns a car, which he does have a car, and he's choosing to fly anyway. And he shops by car, but doesn't go to work by car. He commutes by air. So he's walking to his flight here. This is, to me, extremely realistic. Even if the graphics are not, like, perfect, This feels really real to me. Although again, as I said, the landscape and the streetlights and everything are very much European or even Eastern European. This doesn't look anything like America, except for, you could argue, the desert landscape. There's also hardly anybody at the airport, which of course illustrates why I'm not making a profit off it. I'm not getting crowds of people eager to fly to Erie here. And that is the only flight serving this airport, because the other flight goes to a different airport out of Erie. So as soon as a passenger gets close to a station or airport or what have you, it switches out of the first-person perspective. They don't let you walk through the buildings, and that might be just an attempt at saving effort at modeling the interiors of the buildings. Same thing with the vehicles. When they're in the vehicles, you follow the vehicle if you're following them, rather than sitting in the seat with them, as them. It would be cool if it had that feature, but I guess they figured it would be too much difficulty in modeling it. There are other games that do, in fact, do that, like Train Sim World, for example. But not this game. There are two identical people, well, identical looking people, just because that's how the algorithm generates people in this. And there, Kyle is walking out of the building to get his flight. And he's just standing there on the apron waiting for the flight to pull up. One very old-fashioned thing about these airports is, there's the other guy, Logan Carter, one of the other guys. One of the most old-fashioned things about Transport Fever's airports is that everybody stands on the apron. They don't sit in the waiting room and then walk out on the air bridge. They have to just wait for their flight standing out in the sun or the snow or what have you. Anyway, that's about all I'm going to show for the mature game. I will follow up with a game, so that will be next. So, let's try out one of the free games. Really, the free game is just the default game. So here we have the different options. I'm going to switch it to the default Europe rolling stock and vehicles, rather than the USA DLC. And we're going to go with the medium map size. There are a few options with this. You could see the aspect ratio matters, and the terrain type. When they say medium, they mean basically medium hilliness, if you will. So some hills, but not a lot of mountains. And settings, I'm going to actually lower the resolution of the screen because I'm finding it is making it choppy on the video. I could play in a full HD if I were not taking a video, but the video encoding for Open Broadcaster is not operating correctly because I'm pushing my computer to the outer limits on this video. So, other options. If I went for a large map size, it wouldn't really be genuinely large. It wouldn't give me a lot of additional functionality. Medium is what I had in the previous demonstrations of mature games. These are basically all the settings that I used, except for that I used the USA DLC. Now, if I go to the custom settings, I can add mods and I can basically create my own DLC in a way, temporarily. So down here we have the town names. I'm going to switch these to German because it's a Swiss game, and using English town names with mostly Swiss and German equipment seems a little off to me. The streets, European and American streets, it doesn't matter very much in the original Transport Fever, and I would venture to say Transport Fever 2 isn't much better, that basically everything looks European. And the scenario, I don't even know what they mean by that, but I'm going to leave it on Europe. And The other stuff is more or less obvious, if you're thinking of stereotypical Europe anyway. And we have the seed there, if you look down at the bottom. That will determine how the map is generated, just like in Minecraft and some other games. And I'm not sure what else there is to say, really. We are starting in 1850. The difficulty is set to easy, which is not really easy at all. Basically, Transport Fever is a pretty difficult game. I don't think it's as difficult as Simutrans, but it is challenging. You do have to really watch your costs, even on the easy skill level, because even if you have pretty good business, your expenses can basically kill your profit pretty quickly. So maybe one of the most important things to remember is to not build up your infrastructure too early, because the infrastructure costs a lot, actually. There we have a splash screen, which is, I don't think, taken in-game. I think that's a little bit too fancy for that. Now, the next step will be to find the two towns which are the largest, because I figure I'll just connect them with a railway line, because this will not be a long play, even though the video will be rather long, I expect. This, to matter at all as a long play, this has to be long enough to complete the railway line. So we'll sort the towns by population, and the two largest towns are Gelsenkirchen and Volkach, and so I will connect them with a railway line. But I have to find them first. Here's Gelsenkirchen. It's not actually very large yet, but it is the largest town on the map. And Volkach is... to find it here. Yes, it is over the river. So what I need to do is aim the railway tracks to the west, and I think putting the station in here is my best bet. But I'm going to have to sacrifice some of those buildings there, because I need a street to connect the station to the town. I also am going to go with an extra large platform, the second, basically 240 meter platform, which is the second largest that you can specify, because some of the high-speed trains like the ICE require a very long platform, so I'll at least start with something that's easier to upgrade from, because upgrading the stations later can be really a pain, actually. I'm only going to have 2 tracks though for the moment, because I don't want the infrastructure costs, as I said earlier, to be very high in the beginning. So we now need to put in a street to connect the station. This is actually a necessity. This is not just something you would like to have, because otherwise the passengers will not walk across the grass to the station. They need sidewalks. And it's also a good idea to put in public transport to connect your station to the rest of the city, especially when the city is large. I did this in Train Fever also. So first I'll put in a street right here. It doesn't have to be big. I'm using the smallest street size, but for some reason it's telling me to take out that building there, marked in yellow, which makes no sense. The street's not interfering with it at all. So what am I going to do is the question. I don't think I've actually seen this problem before. Well, if I put a curve in it, yeah, if I curve it a little bit to the right there, I don't have to knock anything down. So I'll do that. I'm Still wondering if there's something I can do about those missing canopies on the outer platform there for the station, notice. But I think for the moment I'm going to have to just look at my transit here and worry about the details of the station later. So we'll put in a bus stop or omnibus stop there, and then I'll try to connect the rest of the city to the station via omnibus, because the station's catchment area is only for the immediate neighborhood, if you see that there. There's a lot that you can't reach, and so that means the passengers will not come in to ride the train. The omnibuses, as in Train Fever, will be highly unlikely to make any money. Basically, these are going to be feeders, essentially, for contributory revenue. Now I'm trying to change these station names. So Bahnhof Gelsenkirchen and Gelsenkirchen Hauptbahnhof. Sometimes these names don't go in. We'll see how we do. Well, that didn't work. I predicted it right. We'll try it again. Bahnhof Gelsenkirchen. Sometimes you have to really hit the return so that it registers. Alright, so you see the industrial district over there, but I am going to look for the proper zones so that we really know what we're doing here. And I have to find them because I've actually forgotten where they are. Because we have different interfaces here from what are in Train Fever and even Transport Fever 2. And I haven't played the original Transport Fever in a month or two, so I have to reacquaint myself with the interface here. Layers, that's a bet what it is. Yes. So land use, this will show us our zoning. And as you can see, we have residences to the left there, commercial in the middle, and then industrial to the right. So I want to connect all these via transit, which in this case will mean omnibuses. Guess put a bus stop in here is one of the first steps. So Gelsenkirchen, Kapellenweg. Harder to see where the next one should go because there's no perfect location for it that I see. So I'll put it there. Gelsenkirchen Lindenstrasse. Now the residential areas probably each need their own tram stop or bus stop. I'm used to saying tram stop, and these will be tram stops eventually once I get into the later stages of the game. I mean, whether I'll get into the later stages in this playthrough is another story, because I'm only trying to get the company to profit. I'm not actually going to play this game to the end on the video. I might go back and do a long play, but I keep talking about long plays and I haven't done one yet. I haven't done one that I consider a long play anyway. Because I've had so many games that I wanted to demonstrate, because there are so many railway and transport strategy games that I like, that it's been hard getting through all of them, actually. I still would like to do Transport Fever 2 and Machine Key and Railway Empire, at the very least. And I don't think I'm going to finish them at this rate anytime soon. Alright, so, other options. I think it might be a good idea to put a stagecoach route in up to Freiburg, which is that town you see up north there. But I'm having trouble figuring out how to... Oh yeah, I remember. We need the wand tool to upgrade this street here. That's actually true for all the Fever games. Construction and upgrades are different. So, now that that's upgraded, I can put in the first of the road depots or barns, and I guess it would be in this era, although that looks like a very 20th century building. Now my next challenge, I have to get my phone and figure out what this would be called in German, because my German is really not very good, and I think I'm going to humiliate myself in naming this. But I do want to stick with German if I can. I'm not going to call the trains Zügen, but I'm going to basically do everything else in German if I can. Because I think I'm going to be irritated unless I do it that way. And you will be irritated by my terrible German grammar, I think. Obviously, if anybody German or German-speaking can correct some of my German grammar, that would be a funny conversation and it would help me with future videos. I don't know how many German-themed games I'm gonna play after this one, but we'll have to see. I've never actually lived in Germany or Switzerland or Austria. I've visited them, I've always enjoyed being there, but I've never actually lived in a German-speaking country in the time that it was German, because I have lived in the Czech Republic for many years. Czech Republic, if you go all the way back, was German-speaking, but it hasn't been German-speaking officially in over 100 years. I am, of course, glossing over the Nazi occupation as illegitimate. So, I could say, I don't even know what you would say for road depot in German, because Bahn could mean railway. So I could say Schiene, but I don't think the word order is correct here. Again, somebody could correct me. I'm experimenting a little bit with Google Translate as I speak. Maybe Gelsenkirchener Schiene? Maybe? I'm not even sure if Schiene is the right word for what is basically a carriage house, because in English, a carriage house is just a type of barn. And barn was also used, in America at least, for tram depots for a number of years. They're usually called car barns. But as I said, I don't know if I'm going to even get to building any tram lines in this playthrough, because I'm going to be so basic about it. And you'll see why, because this is going to be a long video, even though it's not officially one of my long plays. It's actually going to be longer than some of my long plays, but it's just the nature of the game. How time-consuming is the game? I think I'm going to settle on that, even though it's probably wrong. And the next step will be to put in some omnibus lines. And as in Train Fever, there is no horse-drawn omnibus this early in the game with no add-ons. I'm going to have to adapt a stagecoach to be each omnibus. It's the only passenger horse-drawn vehicle available at this stage of the game. So we're just going to have to put up with it. And I'm not going to fill it anyway, even once the traffic starts to pick up. By the time capacity of these becomes an issue, it will be time to go to trams. So, Gelsenkirchen Omnibus 1. This is also probably incorrect from a German perspective. We'll create a new line, as in Train Fever, and I will try to cover as much of the city as I can here on this route. So the station and the commercial district and the industrial district. I guess this is the most basic route. I'll add that northern station with the next one. Next omnibus. Gelsenkirchen Omnibus 2, where's Vi? And connect the northern residential district. In this case to the industrial district. This will be for the development of the city's economy rather than serving the train station, which will still matter because it will push the population up and will increase the business that is possible to get to the station. And these lines connect, of course, at Lindenstrasse. Okay, third omnibus. Are these named correctly? No, they're not. Gelsenkirchener Omnibus 2. Re-enter it. Seems to be a problem with saving the names of my units here. That's annoying. Okay, let's create a new line. Line 3 will serve the south of the city. Again, for economic development, rather than feeding the train station directly. Gelsenkirchener Omnibus 3. How do we do next? Let's see. I can't decide what I'm going to do. I think maybe one more? So, Gelsenkirchen Omnibus 4. I guess we'll go from the northern residential district southern residential district to the commercial district to the station to the northern. And that way, we actually connect the station with more than one omnibus line. Now, I think we should also add a stagecoach route to Freiburg, because this might feed the station, but more importantly, this will be more likely to make money because it's really a stagecoach route. It's a long enough distance, so the economics will be more favorable. The shorter distance routes in Transport Fever just don't make the same amount of money as the longer distance ones, ever, with any transport mode. Of course, you can go in the other direction. If a route is very long, the maintenance of the vehicle can exceed the revenue, but this is an ideal distance for a stagecoach, actually, in the Transport Fever universe. So, I will connect that basically omnibus stop, or coach stop, if you will, in the middle of Freiburg to the station in Gelsenkirchen. And this may bring in a little bit of revenue in and of itself without even thinking about the contributory revenue to the railway line. It's worth trying, I think. The transit routes are going to generally lose money, even though they're necessary to have so that the station has an adequate catchment area. Now, why is this not working? Ah, yeah, the button. That button has to be clicked for you to actually be able to select stations for the route. So we have the station as the first stop. And this will be contributory revenue, not just in the sense of bringing passengers from Freiburg, but also giving passengers going to Freiburg a reason to take the train. Because the AI is sophisticated enough that the individually modeled potential passengers will use connections. They don't require a direct route every time. They can calculate how to best get to a destination through all of your lines. Now, I still don't like the fact I don't have canopies on the outer platform there, and I would like to fix that if I can. In Transport Fever 2, that would be easy because the stations are modular. But I can't figure out how to do it in the original Transport Fever. Maybe it's not possible. If I go to the upgrade, I can increase the number of tracks, but I can't improve the amenities on the tracks, which is annoying. I don't know what to do with that. I guess I'm just going to have to tolerate it, I guess. Now, track. Problem here appears to be that I'm still working in miles per hour. 75 miles per hour instead of 120 kilometers per hour. If we were in Germany or Switzerland or what have you, that is inaccurate and irritating, so I'm not sure what to do with this. The terrain looks awfully nice, but let's see what we can do. We can change the settings in-game without leaving the game. So let's see what we can do with this. Feet, miles per hour, yeah, this has to change. So we'll switch to kilometers per hour. Kilometers, not meters. And horsepower I'll just leave, even though I know that German vehicles are usually measured in kilowatts. Kilograms, maybe metric tons would be better. Yeah. Kilonewtons, that's kind of obvious. Alright. I wonder if there's anything else that I should look at. I'll go with this for now. Alright, so now it's actually saying 120 kilometers per hour. So, I think we're going to go to Bottrop over there by the river, rather than directly to Volkach, because having intermediate stations is definitely more profitable. And I'll put the track pretty close to the coal mine there in case I get to the stage in this playthrough where I would actually have coal trains running. Over the long run, of course I would. But in the meantime, I will just make preparations to have coal trains. Passenger trains are easier to implement in these strategy games generally, even though in real life, usually coal trains are one of the most profitable things that you could set up with a railway. On video game railways, it's a little bit more awkward. Passenger trains are the easiest thing to do, probably in railway video games. Now, why am I struggling with this? I guess maybe if I put in the station first, that's better. So I can connect it that way to the street network without an extension of the street network. and then run the tracks across the river there. Question is this the best angle to use? Because it looks like I might be conflicting with the road. We'll see how it goes. We'll give it a try. So now I will try to connect that to my railway line. That looks like it's going to be awkward. Let's see how it goes. Let's see if this works. Well, surprisingly, no problems. I thought there was going to be. So, now, next step. Connect all the tracks together, because we have 2 stations with 2 platforms, but only a single track railway line for the moment. So I want to connect these so that I can use both platforms if desired. No sense in paying for the platforms if I can't use them. Okay, so now both the stations have both platforms connected. And we will next need a train depot that we can actually build our trains. I've said before that all the Fever games require you to have the access spur before you have the depot, which can create difficulties in building it and choosing the location. In this case, I don't have any problem. I'm lucky this time. I can just put it there. Looks like it. Yeah, that's perfectly acceptable. Even though it's kind of up on a raised foundation there. That's actually exactly what I want, because that way the grade is tolerable. And I'm not going to signal this line immediately because I'm only going to have one train on it, but I will put a signal here for future convenience so that I don't have to think about it. I don't have to be asking myself, why is that train not leaving the depot? Instead, the train will pull up to the signal and wait for a clear line. Now, the next step. We have still not connected across the river to Volkach. So, let's take a look at that. We're going to have to knock down some buildings, but not too many. I guess we'll try to minimize that to the extent possible. I think this angle is maybe the least destructive, perhaps? I didn't mean to do that. Let's see. Okay, so we have to choose the bridge type because we're going to be bridging the river. I think the steel bridge is the best one. The fastest speed available at this stage of the game. Wooden bridge is nice to have because it's very cheap, but the stone bridge is okay. Arguably not as good as a real stone bridge, because a real stone bridge you could probably go a full 120k. But in this case, we'll go with the steel bridge because it's the fastest one, and it's, as you can see, not too much more expensive than the alternatives. And then we'll connect the throat together here. I'm going to run across the street there and connect it after the crossing. That might be a pain later, but for the moment it doesn't matter so much because I don't really foresee any kind of complex traffic flows with one train. That's unlikely. I can fix it later because in the later stages of the game, of course, you have a lot more money to play around and fix things, so we'll just go with what works for now. Now, following the contours of the land here is a little bit more difficult than in the first leg. But the land on this seed is surprisingly easy, I think. Or the topology, that would be the word. Or topography. Topology, topography. Keep getting confused in the best word to use because I work with computer networks as my job, in part. Now, we don't want a depot yet here. I don't think we'll ever get to a second depot in my playthrough. But we do want the station to be located conveniently. If we put it here, we only have to knock down one building. You can fine-tune the rotation of the station by holding down Shift as you're using the M and N keys, so that's what I'm doing here, to try and ease it in just perfectly accurately. But I am still not satisfied with this. I'm going to need more money, for one thing. So I just borrowed some more money. I'll take a look at this again. I might have to knock down 2 buildings at this rate. I don't know. Okay, I managed to do it with only 1 building knocked down. We'll put in the street to connect it to the city. That's the best way to connect this. I think this is going to be a mess. I think maybe I'm going to have to relay this. That cut is so deep, that's going to be difficult to get to the station. It's a really deep cut. Yeah, it's saying terrain alignment collision, which is not really true. What they mean is that it can't cross these roads correctly. That's really what it means. Let's see what happens if we go from the other direction. So here we would need a tunnel or a cut. The tunnel's cheaper. Now we still have a terrain alignment collision. I guess maybe if we start from further back, we can avoid this crazy cut here. Still gonna have to get up there. And that's gonna leave that ugly, unused cut there. Let's see. Well, I can do that if I borrow money. I've already burned a lot of money trying to figure this out, unfortunately. I still have the credit to do it. It's just annoying that I have to spend this much. Alright. And we'll connect the platforms into this throat here. Boom, there we go. But we have that ugly cut there. In theory, I shouldn't fix this because it's a waste of money, but I hate how it looks. So I'm going to level it with the leveling tool, even though I'm going to burn a tremendous amount of money doing this. I just don't like looking at it. In Transport Fever 2, they finally automated this, and it doesn't actually cost you any money to fix something like this. But in the original Transport Fever and in Train Fever, you have to do this manually and you have to spend the money on it. I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to waste any more money on it. It looks less ugly at least. Okay, so next step. Before I run out of money, it's advisable to build my first train. So it will be the Spanish Brot-Liban train again, like in Train Fever, because it's the only train available, with the passenger cars and so on. I'm not going to haul any freight initially, because I don't have any freight stations or anything beyond that coal mine to exploit in this early stage. I'm only going to put 4 cars on this train, or 4 coaches, because the maintenance costs are going to be prohibitive otherwise, because I'm not going to fill even the 4-car train. And it will lose money initially, but it will not lose as much money as it would if I put 5 cars on it. I'm going to gradually upgrade this train because I'm going to preserve enough savings and enough credit so that once the time comes, I can upgrade it and then start making money. In the meantime, I'm just going to have to minimize my losses. So I could, yeah, I don't know. I think probably it's not a good idea to go with 5 cars, even though it's tempting. I predict that on its first stop in Gelsenkirchen, it's not going to pick up any passengers at all, just because this is the very beginning of the game and there won't be anybody on the platform at that early stage. And I'm saying train instead of Zug. I'm not calling the Gelsenkirchen train depot a German name. In later stages I should probably rename them, but in the short term I'm going to stick with English. Say we'll put in the route for the train here. Very simple. I will use the German terminology in this sense. I'm going to call it an RB for Regionalbahn. Not local. Why am I going against my own policy here? Okay, RB. I'll deal with the details later. And Volkach needs to be Volkach Hauptbahnhof. So here I'm contradicting myself. I will use some German terminology, but I will not do everything in German just yet. That's just going to fry my brain, I think. Alright. Yeah, so the train depot, I'll have to rename that. The trains, I can't decide whether I'm going to call them trains or Zügen. I guess if I can't make a choice, I just won't make a choice. Now I could put in riverboats too. I'd have to raise those bridges potentially, unless I put the docks to the west of Bottrop there, but I probably wouldn't make any money on them. Now as for logos, you can actually pick a logo for your company, but this is kind of silly because they only have 3 logos. They're all ugly. And the other thing about Transport Fever and all the Fever games is you don't have any competitors, which is really strange. You have the only company. You don't even have the option of adding competitors, which makes it very different from Railroad Tycoon, of course, and the whole Railroad Tycoon series. So I don't see the point, really. That's one of the weaknesses of Transport Fever, actually, is that you can't use... Oh, you can't set up an opponent. There's no competition. Your competition is basically the auto industry. Which is realistic in a sense if you're talking about the modern era, but for much of the history of railways and transport generally, you had to compete with other companies. Of course, the other unrealistic thing is that you have a transport company that does every mode, which in the history, at least of private companies, has been very rare, actually. Most transport companies are either, railways, airlines, bus companies, trucking companies. And it's relatively rare to have one that does everything, other than maybe a railway like CSX, for example, or a shipping company like Maersk, who have trains and aircraft as well as shipping containers. CSX have never done passenger services, but Maersk have dabbled in passenger services in their air and ferry divisions. Alright, so we're going to set up another barn here for Bottrop, because I think this train station should be fed with omnibuses. I don't think that that's going to work properly unless I set it up that way. I'd like to look up the grammar of this. Again, I'm kind of kicking myself of whether to use German or English, and if I'm using German, I feel really stupid with my German grammar here. I'm going to look through my phone and see what I can do. Let's see. Bottroper? I don't like how that looks, but I'm going to just tolerate it for now and see. If anybody comments, that's wrong. Now, we have the zones, of course. But we are going to need stops regardless of where the zones are. So we'll put one here at the far south of the city, what appears to be the far south. I'm getting disoriented about north, south, east, west with this because there's no compass. This is another thing they could add in Transport Fever 3 because even Transport Fever 2 doesn't have it. Okay, we'll put in a bus stop for the station. There are our zones. The zone's a little bit sloppy. We have commercial and residential mixed together here. And industrial and commercial over there on the left being mixed. I'll just put in stops for each neighborhood here, I guess. Bottrop, Gartenstrasse. Again, we're going to have to use stagecoaches as omnibuses here. I don't know how extensive I should make the network here, because this town is not as big as the other two, obviously. I'm only putting a station here because it's the intermediate, location, you could say, between the original two stations. That's really the only reason. So I can put in transit there. To feed the station. Gelsenkirchen and Volkach are different. I mean, we'll see about this transit network. I can't decide what to do with this. Connect the residences to the station seems to be the goal in this case. If necessary, I'll take this line and I will connect this line over to the industrial district there. But for now, it will be just residences to the station. Yeah, I can't decide whether that's the right decision, but I'm not too intent on showering attention on that village there. Now Volkach, I'm going to have to actually take this more seriously. How am I going to do this? It's complicated. I mean, it's complicated for the first stage of the game anyway. I have the industrial district over there on the right, I have commercial in the middle, but the residences are to the left, to the bottom there, so I guess to the west and the south, and then I have another residential district up north, so that's a lot to serve actually. And most of that will not connect with the station, so it does need transit. Alright, we'll put in the barn first. maybe to put this, yeah, we'll put the first bus stop at the extreme south here. Will be Volkach Lindenstrasse. And then, let's see. I'm second guessing myself on the names of these bus stops. I mean, the solution is to say, you know, whatever the city name is and then whatever Strasse. Because I don't see any other way to keep it straight in your head, since they tend to reuse the names. On a Volkach there. So the commercial district here will be the Mulveg stop. Mulveg is pretty much a straight through station. There's no need to sort of jackknife the route in. Okay, so I think the easiest way to handle the industrial district is to put in this curve here and then put this stop on the curve. All right. And then we have these residential districts out here. Residential zones. I keep saying district, but really these are zones as I understand it. There's a similarity to city skylines and how this is implemented. Although in city skylines you actually have control over your zones. It's a different kind of game in that it's a sort of city development game, you know, a lot like SimCity. So people who play Transport Fever tend to play city skylines. But the games are different. It's not the same thing. They do visually look a little bit similar, teeny bit. But even in that, they're different, because if you were to compare the look of Transport Fever with Machine Key or Railway Empire, the similarity is much more striking than with City Skylines. Alright, so we'll figure out a name for this. Volkach Omnibus 2, why not? And we will give it a different route to try and cover more of the city. We will not do the Bottrop thing. I think we should make proper use of these stations. I think if I play this for the longer term, I will develop Bottrop's transit more as the population grows. I don't like the fact that I left an unserved bus stop in it. I'm going to be second-guessing myself for the rest of the playthrough over that, but I do want to focus on the train, because none of these omnibus services are going to make any money. The only one that might is the stagecoach. I mean, these are strictly feeders. Well, feeders and economic development, basically, support. That line right there will not be a feeder. Freiburg, I can't decide what to do with Freiburg. I mean, I could put a stagecoach route into Bottrop eventually, but I'll skip that for now. Alright, I think now's the time to save this and see how it runs once I have it saved. I want to save it in case the whole thing crashes as soon as I unpause it. Because after all this work, 53 minutes, I don't want to lose everything. So today's date, July 15th, 2021. You will see this much later because it's going to take me a while to finish all this, all the post-processing and everything. But that is the date that I am recording this. Now there we go. The depot doors are open. You can see the smoke coming as the train pulls out, heading to the first station at Gelsenkirchen. Now one of the cool things added in Transport Fever is you can take the cab view like this, or really the front pilot view, and it tells you the train service and the destination. Not the number of the train, but the train service. And we have the speedometer in the lower right. This is all stuff I showed you in the introductory part of this video, actually. So this is just a replay of the same old thing, except we have a kilometers per hour speedometer this time. And we'll probably be following along some of the passengers too, just like in the introduction, to see where they go. So nobody on the platform. I suspect that there will be no business for the first run. There you can see a steam crane building a building. And there we follow a citizen along the street. He's not going to make it to the train station in time, I don't think. He's just going home anyway. He's at home. As you can see, because he's at home, we don't get to see his first-person perspective. Once they go in a building, that's that. So now the train is pulling out. And the train has no one on it. So we're going to have to wait till Bottrop to see any kind of business or any kind of potential revenue, but at the very beginning of the game, that's how it goes. That doesn't mean that this train will be, in the long run, unsuccessful. It just has to build its customer base. And this train, just like in Train Fever, tops out at 40 kilometers per hour. So less than 30 miles an hour. It's not going to be fast. But in the early 19th century, or in this case mid-19th century, 40 kilometers per hour was perfectly acceptable. Train speeds didn't really start to pick up, you could argue, around the world until basically the 1870s. In Britain they were fast earlier than that, but or at least capable of doing 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. But in most of the world, trains were not really very fast until relatively late in the 19th century. But they were faster than the competition, so that will also be true in this game. None of my horse-drawn vehicles go this fast. And so there's nothing really wrong with the train. It's just not making any money because there's nobody on it. Patrick Hahn is walking around here again, going to work. The street scenes are very pretty, I think, even if, like, as I've said before, the costuming, if that's the word, is not 100% accurate in the original Transport Fever. There are flaws to the fashions they put on the characters in both Transport Fever and Transport Fever 2. I mean, I guess when they do Transport Fever 3, they could hire a fashion designer or somebody who's an expert in the history of that to perfect it. Although I do think that Transport Fever 2 is much better than this. But the street scene, like the buildings and everything, are beautiful. I guess maybe the one quibble I have is that they have crosswalks from the very beginning. And I don't think they had crosswalks in the 1850s. So, the train is continuing to go. I was just following Patrick Hahn there as a distraction because this was getting kind of boring. Relatively slow train, not doing anything interesting yet, so I figured that's boring. One of the improvements they add in Transport Fever 2 is you have wildlife out in the fields. In Transport Fever 1, I haven't seen that, so I'm assuming it's not there. So you can see Bottrop up in the distance there. It's going to take a while to get there even now because we're going only 40 kilometers per hour. Alright, finally, we're in Bottrop. And we're pulling in. Let's see if we have any passengers. Hard to see, but if you look very carefully up there in the upper right, you can see somebody getting on. So we have 3 passengers to take to Volkach. But this route is totally wrong. We're supposed to be pulling in on the right there, on platform 1, and then returning on platform 2. So let's fix that. There we go. I also needed to put in Bottrop on the return trip. It wasn't even there. I should have been paying closer attention. That's embarrassing. Anyway. Let's take a look at Volkach while we're at it. Make sure it's actually set up correctly. Yeah, that's acceptable. Alright, so now the question is, how many passengers do we have? Well, some people arriving. This guy's named Herbert Beck, which sounds like a very American name, actually. So if we go to his first-person perspective camera view, it doesn't work because he's already in the station. Notice, though, that he's using the passenger subway. I've mentioned before that in Train Fever and in Transport Fever, the passenger subways are actually functional, so that passengers actually go through them to get to the platforms. They're not just for decoration. Although he was a little bit off-center coming up the stairs there. That could have been corrected. So, we go back to the train. The train is still highballing along at 40 kilometers per hour, but 40 kilometers per hour is a very slow highball. And we still haven't gotten to that tunnel up there. I'm pretty sure that the grade in that tunnel is going to slow the train down pretty badly, actually. It worries me a little bit because I'm going to need to put 5 or 6 cars in the train eventually to finally make it profitable. And making that hill is going to be really a pain, actually. So it's heading for the tunnel. I'm seeing if there's anything else we could talk about here. More passengers are arriving at the station, so this, even if it's not a full load, this would be pretty close to a full load, potentially. Because we have enough time now that the business has developed and people have had the chance to go to the stations. Alright, so you can see how basically the speed has dropped to 19 kilometers per hour and is dropping further to 18. And that's because, as I predicted, the grade in this tunnel is kind of steep. In real life, this would be even more serious, because with a steam train, you end up filling the tunnel with smoke. This would be rather unpleasant for the passengers, potentially. Finally, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here, and the speed is picking up a little bit again. But almost as soon as we're out of the tunnel, we'll be pulling into the station. The train is so slow that we don't immediately pull in. So, looks like we have a lot of business. Let's see if the train fills up. I predict that it will. Yes, all 24 seats filled. The train is still not making a profit, but at least it's making some revenue now. This is going to need another coach, though, because you can't make a profit when your expenses are double your revenue. The margin will not be as bad once it gets over to Gelsenkirchen again. But I have to think seriously about how I'm going to finance upgrading this train here. The maximum loan at the beginning of the game is $10 million, and I'm not there yet. I have $4 million still. But as you can see, the company's losing money, so I'd better hurry up before I end up in cash debt, for lack of a better word. Because I still have some cash. Not enough to upgrade the train, but enough to get me the whole loan if I choose to take it. What am I gonna do here? The question is when to upgrade, not whether to upgrade. The train is going the full 40 kilometers per hour because now it's going downhill through the tunnel. I can't decide what to do here. Of course, even at 40 kilometers per hour, that's still slow, so we're still in the tunnel, and still in the tunnel, and still in the tunnel. So, we're out of the tunnel and the speed is still stuck at 40 kilometers per hour because that's as fast as the train goes. Of course, in the later stages of the game, as I get faster trains, this will be a faster line. As you recall, when I was building it, it had the potential for 120 kilometers per hour. So, we're going to get to see the bridge. I actually skipped that on the trip out. Another thing you'll get to see is how they modeled the water. Because I think the water in the Transport Fever series is the most realistic thing in the game, as weird as that sounds. You'll see in a minute. It's basically photoreal, whereas almost everything else is just nice CGI. All of this other stuff is obviously graphics, but look at the water. The water is actually... You couldn't make it any more realistic, I don't think. Especially because if you put a boat in it, it actually froths the way it's supposed to, too. So notice the people stop at the railway crossing the way they're supposed to. You don't have anybody wandering out into your path and your train just going through their model as if nothing's there. Some train games are like that, but this one isn't. So we still have a fair amount of business here. The problem is, to get any business, we have to have some people get off. And I think we're probably going to leave some people on the platform at this rate. So we made a little bit of revenue there. We're slightly in profit now. That's interesting. Wasn't expecting that. Alright, so the train is almost full, but I think that by the time we arrive at Gelsenkirchen, we're not going to have enough room to take advantage of the revenue, and we're going to be sabotaging our own business, I think. We have to think about the upgrade of the train. I think company is clearly not in profit, even if the train is. So what now? Let's think about this. I'll get rid of these citizens, or at least one guy, because he's not doing anything interesting. The other people are all on the train, notice. So I've been reasonably successful in attracting them to rail transport. Now we're on a hill again. That's why this is so slow. I was thinking, why is this taking so long? Didn't notice it on the way out, just because we were going downhill. Yeah, we're out of profit again. No surprises there. We're in the next year and haven't arrived. And of course the time scale is totally out of whack. You're basically going a day a second in terms of the calendar. So we have, if we look at the stations here, Volkach has the most people waiting. More than the capacity of the train. Waltrop has close to the capacity of the train. So to reiterate, we're going to have to look at upgrading this train shortly. So now, one of the problems is in Transport Fever, it's harder to upgrade a train without losing money. You basically have to replace the whole thing. If I understand correctly, you can do this more easily in a depot, but you have to be in a depot, and I don't want to take the train back to the depot and lose even more money. So it would make sense, unless I can find some upgrade feature similar to Transport Fever 2 here, we're just going to have to replace the train. And the sale of the old train will not be too much of a loss just because it's not that old yet. It's only 2 years old. The total cost will be close to the cost of the new coach. Hopefully less than 200,000. I am still groping for some alternative here, though. Whereas normally what you do is you select which vehicle will replace the vehicles on a given line, and you can replace them all simultaneously, actually. Transport Fever 2 is the same way. In this case, we only have one train on the line, so if we replace it, we're only replacing the one train. So I've selected the Spanish broadly bound train with 5 coaches as the replacement. So now we need to make sure we have enough money. As it happens, it's not really that expensive. As you can see, because we're selling an almost brand new train as we replace it, the total cost is only $158,000. Now, the other aspect of this is the train will not be replaced until the next station. That's one of the limitations. However, it will be handy to replace it in the next station just because we will probably have a lot of business there. But it's still the same old problem. The train's really slow. So we wait, and we're on a grade again, so it's only going 19 kilometers per hour. That'll be worse when we have the 5th coach on, which I'm not really looking forward to, but I think maybe speeding up the timescale is a solution. Finally, I should have done that in the beginning. I wanted to at least give you the full experience of the line. I'd almost forgotten I even had that feature available. Talking all this time. So we're now running at 4 times normal game speed. And now things will go a little bit faster, just because I'm forcing them to. I have to wait and wait and wait for the slow train. And I'll slow it down as we come into Gelsenkirchen. And we'll see how we do. We'll see if we pick up a full load of passengers once we have the 5-car train. Choppy video, which is a little bit annoying. Even though I lowered the screen resolution, it looks like we still have a little bit of a video encoding issue here. The game is a little bit challenging to run, unless your computer is pretty powerful. Alright, so what have we got here? We've got 30 seats, and we filled 12 of them. Well, that's not very efficient, but could be worse. I'm not going to complain. And Christina Kuhn and Hans Schmidt have gotten off the train and are headed to go shopping. Alright, I'm going to speed up the time scale again. The train is zipping along in 4 times speed here. choppy video again, but we're pulling into Bottrop, and it looks like we're going to have some proper business now. Because the platforms have filled up for traffic in both directions. And that also suggests that if we're too much longer, we should probably build another train. I don't know if we'll do that before the end of the playthrough, though. Probably not. Because I predict, yes, we're in profit. And the very healthy margin that before too much longer, the company will be in profit. And I'm going to conclude the playthrough whenever that is, because I don't really want this to be a long play, even though it is a rather long video. By the time it's over, I predict that it will be almost an hour and a half. But we're pretty close to that goal, though. Especially because now that the train is full, when it arrives in Volkach, we'll probably have a pretty big payday, I think. So even in the tunnel, if we run it 4 times time scale, we don't have to wait as long. Which is nice. And we have 47 people waiting. That's a lot. I guess maybe we need to upgrade again. Because otherwise we're not going to be able to take them. Alright, so 6 coaches? Replace? Alright. Still pretty cheap. Yeah, I mean, no sense in passing that up. Another problem too, of course, is that they do model your public opinion in Transport Fever, so you don't want to provide service that's too overly awful, otherwise people start abandoning you. And once they abandon you, it's very hard to get them back, actually, as in real life. You don't want to have bad service. Railroad Tycoon tried to simulate this too, but Transport Fever is especially aggressive in that you don't want to have bad service. It will hurt your business. So the train pulls in, and what do we have? That's a question. Still in profit, not as much of a profit, but we have 3 game years in a row of profit for this train. That's good news. 36 people aboard the train now that we have 6 cars on. Completely full, every seat full. Which means that the revenue when we arrive in the next station will be reasonably substantial, and when we get to Gelsenkirchen it will be pretty big. But how much, we'll have to see. I should know that. It should be easy to calculate because we have the fare. But I will skip it for now. We'll just see what happens. We also have to think about the expenses of the company too, so that's a more complicated calculation. So Christina Kuhn there is still waiting for her train home. So we got some revenue there. Didn't empty the train, of course. The profit margin is huge. on that particular one. And the company is finally in profit. So I guess actually I'm going to end the playthrough because I've reached my goal. So thanks for watching.